Hello, thanks for mathing with me today. Today we're going to talk about ratios, rates, and proportions. Specifically, we'll use ratios and proportions to solve problems. A ratio is a rate, and when two ratios or rates are set equal to each other, it's called a proportion. Let's try some examples. Let's solve the equations. Number 1 says 3 over x equals 5 over 4. When we have a situation where we have two fractions equal to each other, we can use what's called cross multiplication. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply our x times our 5 and our 3 times our 4. And the reason why we're doing this is basically that we want to get rid of the denominators, right? So basically what we're doing is we're multiplying both sides of the equation by 4 times x, 4x, because we want to get rid of the 4 and the x in the denominator. So let's notice what happens when we do multiply both sides by 4x. So we have 4x times 3 over x and 4x times 5 over 4. So on the left, our x and x divide, right, and equal 1. So on the left, we're left with 4 times 3. And on the right, our 4 divides to be 1. So on the right, we're left with 5 times x. So that gives us 12 equals 5x. And then to isolate x, we want to divide both sides by 5. So on the left, we get 12 over 5. And on the right, we get x. So the solution to this equation is 12 over 5. So in number 2, we see that we have a binomial in the numerator of the second fraction, but we're going to do the same process. So remember, we want to cross multiply. So I showed you in the first example how it works or why it works. So in this example, we're just going to kind of do the math part. So we have 5 times x minus 7 on the left, and then 3 times 10 on the right. And it really doesn't matter what parts you put on the left and what parts you put on the right. It's going to be the same thing. So then we have 5 times x minus 7. We're going to distribute the 5, so that gives us 5x minus 35 equals 30. We want to isolate the term that contains the variable, so we add 35 on both sides. On the left, we're left with 5x. On the right, we have 35 plus 30, right, equals 65. And then we want to divide both sides by 5. So on the left, we're left with x. And on the right, we have 13. So our answer to this equation is 13. Now it's your turn to try some examples. So in number 3, don't forget that if you have a integer, that we can rewrite it as 8 over 1, if that helps you to see that there are still two fractions set equal to each other. So pause the video and try numbers 3 and 4 on your own. Hopefully you paused the video and found in number 3 that n equals 3/8, and in number 4, n equals 4. You may have noticed that there are variables on both sides in number 4, so remember that you're still going to solve in the same way. You can just subtract the 5n on both sides. That gives you 7n. If you can do this in the same step, you can also add 18 to both sides, and that gives you 28. So you could do that in the same step, or you could do it in separate steps, which I did here just so that you could see a little more clearly how to go through that process. Let's look at some applications of these. So proportions are used in the real world on a daily basis. You might use them when you're cooking during a recipe. A lot of times businesses use them to predict future profits. In fact, you probably use them without knowing it. So when we're using proportions to solve real world problems, the first thing that you want to do is define your variable. So it is convention to, in math, when you create an equation from word problem, that you define your variable. So you need to tell your reader or the person that is reading the problem what the variable represents. So define your variable first, and then create an equation from the words that represents the situation. And then we're going to use that equation that we created to solve the problem and answer the question. So in number 5, it says, at the pet store, there are 12 cats and 6 dogs for sale. Find the number of cats there would be if the proportion was the same and there were 24 dogs. So what we want to do is we want to create a proportion. Okay, so we know that the proportion of cats to dogs is 12 to 6. So we want to write 12 over 6. And I think it's helpful for you to write 12 cats and 6 dogs. The reason why we want to do this is because when we are setting it up on the other side of the equal sign, we need to make sure that we also are writing the proportion in the same order. So that means that cats must be on the numerator in the right side of our equation, and dogs must be on the denominator. So what we know is that there are 24 dogs. So 24 dogs. Okay, and what we want to know is how many cats. So we want to know how many cats, right? And so the variable then is going to represent the number of cats. So let's write that. Let, and I like to use a variable that makes sense for the problem often. So we're going to say let C equal the number of cats. So our equation then is 12 over 6 equals C over 24. So this is the equation that we created from our problem to solve for how many cats there would be. So we're going to use the same strategy that we did in the earlier problems, cross multiplication, because we have two fractions set equal to each other. So that gives us 6C equals 12 times 24. So, and you can have a calculator. If you don't have a calculator, let's just do our calculations here. 24 times 12. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 2 is 4. And 4 times 1 is 4. 2, 2 times, I messed up there. 2 times 1 is 2. All right, and then we add those together, we get 8. 8 and 2. So 12 times 24 is 288. So we have 6C equals 288. And then we want to divide by 6. So if you have a calculator, great. If you don't, you know your long division. We want to divide both sides by 6. So 28 divided by 6 is going to give us 4. 24. Subtract, drop down your 8. 6 times 8 is 48. So we have C equals 48. So now that we have our answer for C, we want to write a brief statement or sentence that answers the question. So the question is to find the number of cats. And you can just write something like there would be 48 cats. And that's our answer. All right, now we're going to go through this problem a little by little, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to have, I want you to do this on your own, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video a couple times. So again, first thing we want to do is define a variable and create the equation. So we're going to set up the proportion. So I want you to first, so let's read the problem together. In a certain class, there are 18 freshmen and 12 sophomores. So let's set up that proportion. So pause the video and set up the proportion of freshmen to sophomores. Hopefully you paused the video and you wrote 18 freshmen to 12 sophomores, and maybe you abbreviated. That's totally reasonable. All right, so now that we have our proportion, it says we want to find the number of freshmen there would be if the proportion was the same, and there were 8 sophomores. So we see that in our first fraction, sophomores is on the bottom. So our second fraction, sophomores needs to be on the bottom, and I'm going to abbreviate in that one. And so what we don't know is we don't know the number of freshmen, right? That's what we need to find. So I want you to pause the video now, and I want you to define your variable and then write your equation that you're going to use to solve this problem. So pause the video now and do that. So hopefully you pause the video. So we're going to write a let statement, and we're going to say let F equal the number of freshmen. And if you picked a different variable, that's completely fine. It does not matter, just as long as you use the same variable throughout. So now hopefully you made the equation. 18 over 12 equals f over 8. Now, the first thing that I see is that I can simplify 18 over 12, and maybe I could have simplified in the last problem, I don't remember, but the numbers will be easier if we simplify. So let's simplify this equation. So 18 and 12 both divide by 6, right? So that gives us 3 over 2 equals f over 8. This will make our problem much simpler, right? And so we're going to cross multiply, right? And that gives us f 2f equals 3 times 8, which is 24. That gives us f equals 12. Much easier numbers than in the previous problem, probably because I didn't simplify in the previous problem. So definitely simplify. It will save you lots of time and lots of hard math. Okay, so this tells us that there will be 12 freshmen. So there would be 12 freshmen. My hope is that in this video, you learned how to use rates and proportions to solve real-world problems. Thanks so much for mathing with me today.